Turn to Revelation 13, and I want to read verses 1 through 10. The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. And the dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. People worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast. And they also worshiped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it?" The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise its authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Whoever has ears, let him hear. If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. What an extraordinary paragraph that we're going to be looking at about this first beast that comes up out of the sea. And because of the concern that John has in this vision, I've entitled it, God's People Faithfully Standing Their Ground. And we're going to see what that entails. As we get started, I want us to imagine the beast before I put a picture up there. Maybe in your mind you've already seen it, but this beast has 10 horns with 7 heads, and with 10 crowns on the horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. And we'll talk about that, maybe, and what that means here in just a moment. But we want to recognize at the outset of Satan's use of worldly powers, universal and particular, to accomplish his purposes. And this is a reminder in this part of the vision that persecution and hard times will definitely come. And the text seems to ask the question in the vision as a Christian. It's a simple question. Are we ready? Hard times are coming. We can even see it in our own country as time goes on. We may not have the privilege of exercising our faith without persecution in our country in the future. I don't know. But the question is, are we ready? There's affirmation in this vision that there is indeed a way to stand up to the beast. The beast, as the spiritual bully, cannot stand up to God. Now, he's going to bully the inhabitants of the earth, but the Christians don't have to give in. It kind of reminds me of an old scene way back on an Andy Griffith show where Barney Fife was taking judo lessons. And because of his being the deputy, he was trying to enforce a store owner not to sweep all of his dust and trash out in the street. Well, this guy challenged Barney. I'll meet you in the dark alley one night. Let's duke it out. Well, Barney, he was taking judo lessons, and Andy said, he'll kill you. So what he did was he got the judo instructor to dress up and stand in for Barney. And boy, he took care of that store owner in the dark alley of the night. And as I was reading this, that scene came to my mind, that God, through the risen power of the Lamb that was slain before the foundation of the world, we have godly power to stand up to this bully called Satan. And we get to look at it here in just a moment. So this beast, let's start off with the beast. Here's one of the pictures that I found. I don't know if it matches in your mind kind of what you thought, but here's one artist's rendition of it. But this beast comes out of the sea. Each head is inscribed with a blasphemous name. Now, we're not told what that is. I mean, inquiring minds want to know, but the vision doesn't tell us. What Bible scholars have suspected is that on each one of those heads, there was a name that referred to maybe Lord or God, power, authority, so that everything that you could relate to God, Satan is saying with this beast, I'm taking it for myself. And that becomes blasphemous then. The 7 heads represent the rulers of the beast's kingdom. And these 10 horns, people think, represent the different kings of that time with the beast. The crowns made of gold represent their authority. Some people think that maybe even as John had this vision, at least for the original readers of the 7 churches of Asia, there may be a reference to Domitian himself as the ruler of Rome, because he wore a gold crown engraved with images of Rome's chief deities that they worship. Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva was engraved on his crown. And he had priests, that all of those priests would wear similar gold crowns. And they were decorated with the likeness of Domitian, who wanted to be recognized as king and Lord. See, one of the things we need to keep being aware of as we go through Revelation, Christians during John's day, when he's having this vision, they were directly challenged in a way that we're not. Is Caesar Lord or is Christ Lord? Is Domitian Lord or is Christ our King? Is Nero the ultimate authority or is God ultimate authority? And the Roman government and civil leaders, they made no bones about it. You either said yes, or depending on where you were in the Roman Empire, something terrible is going to happen to you. Thrown to the lions, in the Colosseum, burnt at the stake, beheaded, thrown into prison, depending on where you were, but it was not going to end up well. One of the heads seems to have had a fatal wound. Now, it's interesting because it doesn't say it was, but it seems to have had. And this near fatal blow, many church historians think that it's kind of a reference to all of the civil infighting in the Roman Empire. Did you know that there's one time in the first century, just within a few years, 2 years maybe less than that, there were 3 Roman emperors. Each one of them got killed in succession. Somebody took the throne again. I don't know why a person would want to be a Roman Caesar and a Roman ruler. They typically didn't last very long. But the infighting, some people think that this expression of the near fatal wound, but it recovered, is a representation of all of that civil war going on inside of the Roman leadership. And it looked like at points that the Roman Empire was going to fall, but it didn't. And notice that the expression nearly slain to death is the same phrase that's used for the lamb being slain in chapter 5, verses 6, 9, and 12. The lamb was slain, and here the beast was almost slain. The outcome of the lamb being slaughtered is to allow humanity to come to God and to worship him. But the outcome of this first beast being nearly slaughtered was to recover and to force all of humanity to worship it as a beast. And it looks like what John does, this is fascinating. If we had time, we could go back and look at this. In Daniel 7, there's 4 beasts. And this one beast that we're looking at in chapter 13 of Revelation pulls some of the major characteristics of all 4 of those beasts in Daniel 7, and they all come together in this one beast, in Revelation 13. And it's almost like that in the vision, it's saying this way that Satan is working through this beast. And if you can think of beast in quotation marks, meaning all of the ways that Satan's going to operate through civil authorities and imperial powers and governmental forces and everybody that's against Christians. But it's like this vision is saying, this beast, this first beast, it's the worst that you can imagine, with Satan doing the worst that he can imagine. And that's why it's pictured the way that it is. So instead of worshiping the resurrected Lamb, notice in this vision, the inhabitants of the earth end up worshiping the nearly resurrected beast. He wasn't quite killed. He wasn't quite resurrected. But that's the beast, as we've described him. Now look at the actions of the beast. And this is interesting because he is sort of the henchman of the dragon. Because guess what? The dragon gives the beast power, throne, and authority given to him from the dragon. And it exercises that authority for 42 months. He's given authority over the earth. This time frame is used exclusively for the period in which God's enemies persecute and oppress his people. This isn't the only time. We run across 3.5 years or 42 months. Remember back in chapter 11 and verse 2, this was the time when the Gentiles were going to trample the temple in the holy city. This beast was given a mouth to utter blasphemies and slander. The arrogance of the beast causes him to blaspheme God and his name. That's one of the things about Satan that I was thinking about this week. Satan is the ultimate embodiment of pride and arrogance. And it seems like that was the fundamental thing that got him kicked out of heaven that we saw earlier. He was hurled down. And it was precisely because of his arrogance and his pride, thinking that he could enforce his will in heaven. Well, it didn't happen. But like the arrogance of the beast, it causes him to blaspheme God and his name. And the Jews, you may remember, like the Jews who blasphemed and slandered the believers in Smyrna, chapter 2, verse 9. The beast now blasphemed God and all of those dwelling in heaven with him. He has the power to wage war and conquer. Because the beast has killed the saints, he appears to have triumphed over the church. And I was thinking about that, in John's day, in certain cities all over the Greco-Roman Empire, where there were small churches, because of the power of the Roman government and how it could wield its way and its will and desire over these small groups. I suspect there were some house churches that disappeared. People probably scattered because of persecution and ran off to another city. And there were people being killed. And I suspect that at one level, Christians were looking around and looking like, man, we're fighting a losing battle. This is not looking good. Okay? And it's because for a short time, remember earlier, Satan knows his time is short. So he's this dragon that is enraged and he's in fury and he's trying to take everybody with him that he can in the short time that he has. John already knows by this time that those in heaven have overcome the devil by the blood of the Lamb. Now we need to think about this for a minute because I think this is so critical. All of us have ways, I think, that we're sort of aware of how Satan tempts us and we can see him working in the world in ways that's not good. But there's an ultimate power that Satan can't touch. And that's the sacrificial blood of the Lamb to take away our sin. That's stronger than Satan make us sin. And we didn't think about that. But then also because of the sacrificial Lamb and his resurrection, that in and of itself limits Satan's power. Now, it's interesting too because there are people that think about this idea of the near fatal wound and then return for a while. Some people connect it to what's called the Nero coming back to life myth. And I won't go into all the details, but we know of at least 3 individuals after Nero died that wanted to go back to Rome and try to take some people with him and claim, I'm Nero coming back to life and I'm taking over. And that myth about Nero persisted even through the end of the first century, and was kind of strange. But every time someone came along, they claimed to be Nero, even though Nero had died. Now let's look at the responses. We've looked at the actions of the beast: blasphemy, to wage war, and to conquer. Well, let's look at the responses. Notice that people worship the dragon. They worship the beast, but it sounds like they worship the beast mainly because they were worshiping the dragon. This response is occasioned by the exercise of the beast's universal authority. The inhabitants of the earth are excluded, and this is clear. They're not in the registry of the book of life belonging to the Lamb. We're going to talk about that book of life here in a moment. But the whole world is filled with wonder and astonishment, and they're following the beast and the dragon. So people then ask this question. This is amazing. Look in the reading. I thought this was fascinating. And I hear opposite questions like this in the book of Psalms. Who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it? It sounds like saying, well, that's a rhetorical question. People saying, well, there's no way we can overcome Satan. Let's just kind of give in. In the book of Psalms, it's kind of the opposite question. Who is like the Lord of heaven and earth? Who can wage war against Jehovah? And the answer there is nobody. And it's like Satan doesn't get the message back then, because here the people are saying the same thing about the beast. So what does it mean then? The responses to the beast. Well, people are going to worship where their hearts are. And if you allow yourself to give in to Satan's enticements, and you allow yourself to be scared off from your Christian commitment because of persecution, or things get too hard, there's so many ways in which we could end up worshiping Satan. And a lot of people do. In fact, as you know, there are Satan worshipers, which in my younger years, I would never have dreamed of hearing such a thing. But there are people who actually worship Satan. The problem is a lot of the people too worshiping him, but they don't know it. At least they've not cognitively thought through that process. So the question is, as we look in this narrative of the vision with the first beast, how do you stand up to this beast? Are we all just going to kind of worship the beast and we all just kind of give in? Well, John in the vision is going to give us some wonderful insights into this. And I really want to kind of like take the hammer and nail this home. First of all, our name being written in the book of life. This book of life belongs to the Lamb, and it's the registry of God's elect and people who are saved from Satan. In 1 Peter 1:20, we find that Jesus was chosen from the foundation of the world to accomplish God's salvation for his people. We know in Ephesians, God's people are chosen in Christ before the foundation of the world. So Peter and Paul and John are all clear on this point in their teaching about God's people. He has chosen his people in Christ from the foundation of the world, and being martyred doesn't mean that your name is going to be erased out of the book of life. What I'm wondering is, though John never goes into detail, I'm wondering if there were some Christians struggling with the idea that if I get killed before Christ comes back, then it's too bad for me, because I'm really waiting for Christ to return, or some other misinformation or wrong ideas about being martyred. But John says, no, I'm not going to erase your name out of the book of life. Then he says, those that have ears to hear, let him hear. This modified hearing goes back to, and it recalls, the 7 prophetic messages to the churches in chapters 2 and 3. And it asks the readers and the listeners to the original reading of the Revelation, challenges them to pay attention to the next pronouncement. And what is really cool, and before a few years ago, I didn't even know this about Revelation. In the second half of the book of Revelation, if you look at chapter 13 and the very last verse, verse 10, toward the end of verse 10, the NIV says this calls for. Now, if you use another version, I think it may say something like, here it is, or this is it, or something like that. But this calls for. 4 times in the second half of the book of Revelation, the visions clearly say this calls for something. Chapter 13:10, this calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. 13:18, next week is Easter. I want to have an Easter lesson next week. So we'll leave the second beast for the following lesson after Easter. But the next beast that we talk about in chapter 13, he says, this calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it's the number of a man. And we get to do that. I'm going to show you how to calculate that. It won't be, it's close to what a lot of people have consensus on, but that number is 666, okay? So we'll talk about that. Now, what's interesting is that verse starts off with, this calls for wisdom, okay? 14:12, this calls for patient endurance on the part of the people of God who keep his commands and remain faithful to Jesus. And then 17:19, this calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sat. And I think that's a reference to Romans 17:9. So notice that this phrase, this calls for, 4 times in the second half of the book of Revelation, is within the context of patient endurance, faithfulness, insight, and wisdom. All of those are needed for God's people to make it through the hard times. Notice the language, too, that may have been sort of hard for his first readers, of those in the 7 churches of Asia, to accept this. But he says, the full phrase, if anyone wants to go into captivity they'll go. If anyone wants to be killed with a sword, they will be killed. It's a realistic warning to these Christians to be prepared for future suffering. Just because you're a Christian, he's not saying, I'm going to keep you from experiencing that. Rather, what we find in the book of Revelation is an affirmation. No matter what you're going through, if you go through the fire, God walks through the fire with you. And this sort of sounds a little bit like Jeremiah 15:2, where Jeremiah, he said, if they ask, where shall we go? This is what the Lord says. Those destined for death, to death. Those for the sword, to the sword. Those for starvation, to starvation. Those to captivity, to captivity. And what's interesting is in Jeremiah, God is telling Israel to accept now what is coming. Punishment now, but future hope. Whereas here, in this passage, chapter 13, it's Christians with persecution right now with future hope. What about this idea then of patient endurance? It's really an important word in the book of Revelation. Hang on. Remain under what you're going through. It challenges each Christian to face squarely with a strong faith what they're having to deal with. And then faithfulness. This faithfulness is just so crucial. Trusting God to provide the power and the presence, salvation past and future, to be able to hang on to their faith. So when we look about standing up to the beast, we see that it's going to take endurance, it's going to take faithfulness, wisdom, insight, discernment, all of those. And to be able to stand up to the beast with the attitude that says, Satan, throw your worst at me. It's not going to move me. Because I'm standing here with God. And I guess we need to hear that more. Do your worst. But not bother me. Not going to move me. Because I'm standing on Christ the rock. Okay, so God and Christ and the Spirit are going to help me stand. And that's that patient endurance and the faithfulness that is so needed. So as we close this lesson out, notice that through the dragon, the first beast kind of has his day, is what it sounds like. Yeah, he's going to do a lot of destruction. He can do a lot of things. Fortunately, the vision doesn't stop there. The beast out of the sea is the most evil representation of Satan's emissaries. And the action of the beast is to blaspheme, wage war, and conquer. And responses to the beast from all over the world is astonishment and worship, bowing down to its authority. Oh, but standing up to the beast, that's the good word this morning. We don't have to give in. We don't have to live under his authority. You see, we can stand up with patient endurance and faithfulness and being willing to ask God to give us the strength to have this wisdom and this faithfulness and insight and patient endurance, and to be able to accept whatever comes. Not going to shake my faith, not going to shake your faith. So back to our original question, are we ready? No matter what Satan dishes out, no matter what the times are like, no matter how bad the news gets, are we ready? That's what this is all about. And I hope that's going to challenge each one of us to think through answering the question personally for ourselves. Are we ready?